Give me the Bible, star of gladness gleaming, to cheer the wanderer, lone and tempest tossed. No storms can hide that radiance peaceful beaming, since Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Give me the Bible, holy message shining, thy light shall guide me in the narrow way. Precept and promise, law and love combining, till night shall vanish in eternal day. Give me the Bible when my heart is broken, when sin and grief have filled my soul with fear. Give me the precious words by Jesus spoken, hold up faith's lamp to show my Savior near. Give me the Bible, holy message shining, thy light shall guide me in the narrow way. Precept and promise, law and love combining, till night shall vanish in eternal day. Give me the Bible, lamp of life immortal, hold up that splendor by the open grave. Show me the light from heaven's shining portals, show me the glory gilding Jordan's wave. Give me the Bible, holy message shining, thy light shall guide me in the narrow way. Precept and promise, law and love combining, till night shall vanish in eternal day.
Let's go to God in prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. We thank you for all the blessings of life that you have blessed us with. We're thankful for your love. We're thankful for the opportunity to come to study your word, to sing songs, to edify your name and magnify you, and to approach your throne in prayer. We're so thankful for that privilege. We ask you to be with those that are sick, that are listed in our bulletins, that they can be restored a portion of their health back, if it be thy will. We ask that as we go throughout this day, that we seek to glorify you and to do all things in accordance with your will. We ask this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
If you didn't hear a few minutes ago, we'll be studying from Ecclesiastes chapters 11 and 12 this morning. Not all of those chapters, but a portion thereof. And I don't know where you are in your reading from going through the Bible this year, but I know you should be somewhere around Ecclesiastes. And I want to begin with verse 9 in Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and go into chapter 12 and look at some things that happen as we get older. If you have your bulletin, this will be a good time to use that blank spot for notes, because there may be some things you'll want to write down. Just keep them. It's interesting how Solomon has written what's called, some people call Ecclesiastes the searcher. Some call Ecclesiastes the preacher, which is what it comes around to a preacher. I want you to notice down here at verses 9 and 10 in chapter 12 very quickly. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words to write, words of truth correctly. And I was thinking about that as a Bible teacher, or as a preacher, or just a good student, that we need to try and do some thinking. Put your thinking cap on. And the preacher taught the people knowledge. And he pondered, so he thought about it, so he could write things down correctly. We have an obligation in teaching to teach accurately God's word of truth. Handle it aright. 1 Timothy 3:15. So, Solomon, I have pondered this using his word quite a bit. You know, Solomon, when he got old, his wives turned his heart away from God. I've read that, and I've read Ecclesiastes, and I'm leaning, because I can't be sure, but I'm leaning toward the idea that Solomon wrote this after all of that, and he thought, I made some grave errors, and I want to talk about it. We don't know that for certain, but it would be odd, precious people, for him to write these things and then go astray, wouldn't it? That would be odd. So it appears to me that he came back to God, and if he did, you know, I'm still leaning that way, but nonetheless, that's something to study. But he talks to young people, beginning with verse 9. But I want you to think about even applying this to yourself if you're not a younger person. Because if you are in the category of people whose mind is still good, and you're still reasonably healthy and active, these still can apply even if you're 75 years old, if you're reasonably healthy. But he is leaning toward the younger people, to young people. And I think of young people in their teenage years, or maybe even in their 20s before they get married. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. And follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Now, I'm going to talk about the judgment in a moment, but I was just thinking about how Solomon is telling young people to have a good time while you're young. There's nothing wrong with it. I was talking to a young man yesterday in the state of Kentucky, and he works with an alternative school. And there are young people there that their home life's not good, and they are troubled teenagers. And I asked him if he could get them to come to church. He said, well, I don't know if they'll let me ask them or not. I said, well, you won't know till you find out. But I think that some young people want to have a good time. They don't even know how to have it without getting into trouble. And so we tried. Aren't you thankful for any good upbringing that you had, that you could have a good time without getting into trouble? And you can enjoy your childhood and not do things you shouldn't do. And yet sometimes we do want to test things. And Solomon says, look, son, enjoy it. Let those years be pleasant and follow the impulses of your heart. And I'm thinking that, you know, try things, try new things, venture out a little bit. In your career life, what are you good at? Try, you know, and try to learn and do something you're good at and would enjoy. In your entertainment life, you know, there are some things that are very foolish, very foolish. I grew up in Chattanooga, and they dammed up the Tennessee River. I think it was 1939. TVA did, and of course it made what's called Chickamauga Lake, and it's a wonderful waterway, just acres and acres and acres of. You can ski, you can fish, you can enjoy the water, but there's some high rock bluffs, and there are young people, and I'm talking high, that at least as high as the apex of this ceiling from the water, maybe even higher than that. And they'll jump off of that. Sometimes they'll dive off of it. And I hope, but the water's deep. And so I guess it's not so bad if you know the water's deep and you can swim, but there's some things you just better be careful, hadn't you? Because you might not survive that one jump. And do just things, to enjoy. But when we're young, Jonathan, we think we're going to live forever. Don't we, Mike? I mean, think about death. That's for somebody else. That's for old people. But then again, he says enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with it. God wants young people to enjoy their youth, but he said, follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes, but there are limitations. God has set limitations on what you look at and where your heart will take you. And he says in the latter part of verse 9, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So whatever you do, you're going to answer to God for. And that's one of the things that would help me at times when I was younger. I wish this room was full of teenagers. But I'll put this on the internet, and you can set your YouTube settings that say not for kids or for kids, and young people can watch it. I don't know how many young people would without cartoons, but unless they think I'm funny looking, but they will answer to God. And that was one of the things in the back of my mind when I was younger, but there were times I'd push that envelope. I knew better, but I'd do it anyway. And I'm not asking you to raise your hands if you did that. I think we all probably did that some. I remember my mother telling me, my mother was a good little girl, but she had an older sister that could get her into trouble, and everybody in the family knew it. And they're both gone now, but my grandma had bought Mama a sunsuit. I don't know what it looked like. She was a little kid, and they didn't have a lot of money. And her older sister talked her into going in the creek in that sunsuit. Well, that made Grandma very, very, very unhappy. But Mama remembered getting into trouble for doing that, and it bothered her. She said, I shouldn't have let Vera talk me into doing that. And so young people need to remember that other people can talk you into doing things that you ought not do. And fortunately, that was the worst thing that happened. And so I would love to spend a lot more time on this, but just think that in your youth, did you ever have somebody try to get you to do something that was just outright sinful? I remember we did not drink in our house. We didn't drink alcohol in our house. The only alcohol we had in our house was rubbing alcohol. And some fella moved in down the street into a house that some of our friends had lived in and moved away from, and I think they were renting it out. And this fella didn't have the same kind of upbringing that I did. And I remember him bringing a beer to our house and poured it out into a glass. And I tasted of it because nobody's there, and I thought if Mom and Daddy came in here, they'd skin me alive. But, that could have started something, couldn't it? Aren't you thankful for your upbringing? And I had another friend his dad was dead, or his parents were divorced. I don't know if he even knew his dad, and his mother would keep beer in the refrigerator, and I remember him wanting to do that one time, and I thought, I wasn't raised that way. I knew I'd have to give an account to God, and we will. So it's all right to have a good time, but doesn't that apply to any of us? It's all right to have a good time, but not to the point that it causes you to sin, that it's going to be a problem on the day of judgment. And that's a good, Jonathan, you and Carly, you get married, you get some kids, they get a little bit older, sit down and talk to them about this verse. When they're old enough to understand that, have a good time, but you'll answer for it. But then he says in verse 10, so remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. And so don't think about the bad things of life. When Jesus talks in Matthew 6 and verse 34, he talks about tomorrow having enough trouble. Is it possible that something really bad could happen today to one of us? So you're going to sit around and think about it? And some people live that way, though, don't they? All they do is think about the negative. Think about the negative. And Solomon says, well, don't think about that right now. Now, he's going to talk about the difficult times that will come. And I think it's good for young people to remember this, but it usually doesn't sink in. When I was younger, we went and visited my grandmother's sister in Knoxville, Tennessee, in what they called an insane asylum. And it was, all those people in there were crazy. I mean, that's what they said, And then the church would go to a little home in Chattanooga on certain Sunday afternoons and hold worship for the elderly people. And that was a good thing, but I never thought at that time that I'll ever be that way. I was thinking about, I enjoyed doing it, I really did, singing with those people, and it was a good exposure for me, but then when I got out, I forgot all about that nursing home. I thought about something I wanted to do as a young person, and that's okay, but one of these days, those days will come, if you live long enough, won't they? Age happens. It happens, and the body changes. For some people, it changes more than others. And some people have more serious heart troubles. Brother Larry started having heart trouble, and he was like 50 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I remember him telling me that. And I'm not asking people's ages, but Brother Jimmy's found out recently he has sugar diabetes. I mean, these things come on us, and I remember that happening to my dad, and for years he ate whatever he wanted to. But then one day it turned up he was diabetic. And then when he was probably right at 60, something like that, whatever 1929 is to 1989, that's 60. All of a sudden, he started getting macular degeneration. And it just seemed to just come on him like that. And it was the dry type, which means you can't treat it. Mama had the wet type, and then, you get the injections, and those injections just slow the process down because it's a leakage, but you can't stop it. But, so here's Daddy with diabetes. His vision was always perfect. And then he started losing his hearing. And let me ask you, without you just being totally, can it affect your personality? It can, can't it? And I know it affected his, and I'm not criticizing him. But the point Solomon is saying is go ahead and enjoy your youth. But then he says in verse 1 in chapter 12, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. Now he's laying down a point. Okay, you have a good time, enjoy your youth, but you need to remember God's going to bring you into judgment for these things. So you be careful what you choose to do. But then also he says, don't forget God while you're young. If I can change the wording a little. Don't forget God. You need to remember God. Plant the idea of God in your mind and your heart while you're young. And train up a child in the way that he should go. And when he's old, he'll not depart from it. Proverbs 23 and verse 7. Why is it important to train up a child, Sister Sammy? So why do we train them when they're young?
Because you can wait too late sometimes, they may not learn it as they should.
Their minds are so impressionable right now. And I know we talk about this, we do this Marco Polo, and it's like video clips. That's just our families in this group. And so Amanda does it a lot with her children because she's a stay-at-home mom and she has a lot of time for it. So she'll show the kids eating or playing outside, but then they're teaching those children about God and about the Bible. And Clay and Jessica with little Amos, planting that idea early. And I want to tell you, young people, anybody that's listening online, or Carly, you and Jonathan, you get married, if you have children, people say, well, you're just brainwashing their children. You got that right. I want to brainwash them with truth, and I'm not embarrassed to do it. There is a God. He is alive. And even Paul would say in Acts 17 to the people that didn't know God, in Him we live and move and have our being. Tell that child young, because the atheists say, well, you're just brainwashing them. That's just their cop-out for not wanting to believe in God. And teach them that the Bible is God's Word early. Teach them to respect God. Teach them to love Jesus, love the Bible, love the church, love going to church. Teach them that early. They may not stay with it, but they'll always know what to come back to if they leave. And I believe Solomon did that. But now, so Solomon, by inspiration, tells the young people, you remember him. And you notice he's talking to the young people. And sometimes we think, well, the parents need to do this, and they do, but sometimes other people need to tell them that, don't they? From others. And he says, now I'm going to move in a little bit different direction here. Evil days will come. And he's not using evil here as sinful, but hard days. Sin brought death into the world, Romans 5:12. And with that, the difficulties of life, right? I mean, if death came into the world, then there's the process, the aging process that will ultimately bring about death. We were talking about COVID taking people, and yet usually COVID takes people who have other health issues already, sometimes young people, but usually older people. But things happen to our bodies and we cannot resist. The body cannot fight things off. Some people have a great ability. God just blessed them that way, that they don't get sick much. And some people seem like they stay that way all their lives, and it's something you can't help. But there are certain things that pretty much happen to everybody, maybe not all of them. Maybe not all of them. But let's look at some things here, some of these figures of speech. I have a little book that I bought, and I don't always endorse the teachings of denominational people, but I read a lot of things and I try to filter out that which is not biblical. But this is a little book by Ray Stedman, Stedman. It's called "Is This All There Is to Life?" And it's a brief commentary on Ecclesiastes. He did a pretty good job with it, and he got down to these different figures here, and I wanted to share some things, and I think that his conclusions are right, but the figures are not always that easy to discern. And he says, verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no delight in them. People get older and they say, life's not fun anymore. Well, it's not. I was talking with Brother Larry yesterday, and last night, I didn't know what time was too late. He says, well, we might not go to bed till 3 a.m. And I said, well, I'm not calling you at 3 a.m. But, there are people's routines, and I said, well, I want to come see you. And he said, well, don't come Tuesday. And he said, and all next week, we're going to the doctor. All next week. And I thought, isn't that fun? Well, it's not fun, and I'm not making fun of it, but that's the hard reality for some people. If you don't have to go to the doctor a lot and you're older, sometimes people say, knock on wood. How about thanking God? But let's look at some of these figures. He says, before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. And I believe Mr. Stedman was right when he's talking about the mental faculties. The upper part of man, the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened. My dad was 83 when he passed, and his mind was sharp. There were other issues, but some people, my mother was not that fortunate, was she? You met her, and things happen to the mind. And I'm already facing trouble. So where did I put that? And I try to remember where I put things. And if you think it's funny, you better quit laughing, because it'll come after you one of these days and say, I don't even know what room I'm in. Now, I haven't gotten to that point. Is this my house? I've not gotten to that point either. But it can happen, can't it? Whose house am I in? What day is it? My mother didn't know what day it was. She didn't know what time it was. She didn't know what month it was. And my brother came to see her in March of 20, and she only had 2 children. After he left, she said, well, I don't know who that man was, but I reckon he had a good time. And I thought it was kind of humorous in one way. Another way, it was very sad. She didn't know her own son. And she probably would have forgotten me if she didn't live with me. But I'll share this with you. She had enough that we went to see her on Thanksgiving last year, and she was at the fellowship home, and she said, are you still teaching and preaching? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, that's good. That's the last question I remember her asking me. And I thought, well, that much was there, and I'm thankful. And I won't quit. But sometimes you lose that, don't you? You don't know who your husband or your wife is or your children. And so what is Solomon saying? He's not saying these things are not going to happen. They are going to happen. What happens if you don't know God early and you get old and you lose your mind? You're as good as dead as far as that goes. You can't learn something you don't have the capacity to learn. And I want to say this too. I wish I had more time, but I'm talking to all of us. Learn as much of God's Word as you can with the time you have. Because when you get older, it'll still be there. And you never know when you might need it. You never know when you might need it. So the next thing he says, so he's talking about the loss of the mental capacities. And he says, and the clouds return after the rain. I don't know if Mr. Stedman was right about this. He was thinking that refers to second childhood, and maybe it does. I know there is, you know what second childhood is. It's like, and maybe, you know, the clouds come back. It's like my mother could remember things, and you know, other people can remember things from their youth. You know, and it was funny, and you've probably experienced this with other people. I'm not holding my mother up, but I just remember she talked about mom and daddy. I miss my mom and daddy. I'm talking about an 88-year-old woman missing mom and daddy. That's like a child, isn't it? But it's just a reality. And yet the mental faculties are not there to be able to be reasonable. And if you ever experience this with a person who has dementia, do not try to reason with them, because it'll just kill you. You can't do it. You can't reason with something that's not there. And it took me a while to figure out I'm not getting anywhere with this. But here's the thing. People say, well, you lost your mama. I lost my mama a long time ago, if you know what I mean. You didn't know her. I wish you could have. But those things happen, and you won't have the ability to make spiritual decisions. Make them now. Make firm, solid decisions while you're capable and your mind is able. Study God's Word. Let it teach. Let it guide. And then he says, in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. Sometimes the body is referred to as our house. What trembles? Your hands. You know, and what's the actor that has that? Michael J. Fox. And what is it that he has? Parkinson's. And it causes him to shake. But it was unusual for somebody to get that at his age. But you know, Will's hands shake. But it has nothing to do with age. It's just a little tick he has. But this is when you get older, and it's like, why were we very careful to put our first grandchild in my mother's lap? Because she might drop her. That's what's in our minds anyway. Why did we put a lid on my mother's cups? Because she could spill them. You know, her vision wasn't good, and Mama's hands were fairly steady. But if your hands are not steady, he's just talking about the things that happen. And he says, the mighty men stoop. And I'm thinking, yes, and you see people walking like this, and I'm not making fun, because I may get that way. You might get that way if you're not already. You know, the body goes through these changes. Your muscle tone begins to diminish. Your mind is not what it was, and so the body goes through these changes. And I want you to think about this. You plant God in His Word in your mind early, and I mean as early as right now, October the 8th, 2021, at 10:05, start. Because when you get older and all these things start happening to your body, what are you going to be thinking about? Your health. And other things can... Now, but if God is in your mind and in your heart, and His will is in your mind and in your heart, even though those things happen, you function much better. You ask Larry Guy. As much trouble as he has, he knows God. And it didn't just happen, did it, Tony? He put God in his mind a long time ago. Sister Joanne did. And others have. But these things happen. So then the teeth, it says the mighty men stoop, and the grinding ones stand idle because they're few. So I want you to go back to 950 BC and find me a place that makes false teeth or partials. It's in my old Southern vernacular, it ain't gonna happen. You know, they didn't have false teeth back then. If you lost your teeth, you just had less teeth, and you got by. And you could go back 100 or 150 years here. If people didn't have the money, they didn't get them either. So you lose your teeth because they're few. And he says, those who look through the windows are dim. What's that talking about? Your vision. I have my eyes checked regularly. I've been going every 6 months. Now, I don't know if the doctor wants the money or if he just thinks I need to, but Medicare is paying for it, so I don't mind. But Daddy had macular degeneration. Mama had macular degeneration. I've passed the age where Daddy got it. I don't know how long my mother had it. She might have had it a lot longer than we knew and wouldn't have said it. She wouldn't have said anything. But they can check you for that. They can't stop it, but they can treat it earlier to slow it down, especially if it's the wet time. But you do lose your vision. I hate wearing glasses, but at least I have some to wear. When we would go do our mobile medical teams in Central America, people would donate old glasses. And a lot of reading glasses, they just buy new ones and they'd have a good supply. And sometimes, like if I got new glasses, I could donate mine, and the optometrist or ophthalmologist, whichever one would go with us, would get something as close to as they could for somebody who had none. They may not be perfect, but they would have something better. And how many of you if you couldn't find your glasses for a day, would you have trouble? Yeah. I mean, I could go around the house, but I don't know if I could read the microwave or the stove. I don't know if I could read it. I'd be like my mother with a magnifying glass. But you lose your vision. So what's going to happen to your Bible reading if you can't see it? So know it now. What are we learning here? So I can't change this, but know it now. And I'm thankful for audible Bibles that you can listen to. Went to see Shirley and Lossie the other day, and I said, "You're listening to Alexander Scurvy." She said, "No, I'm listening to the Bible." I said, "Well, maybe you didn't know the reader." She said, "No, I didn't." So this guy from England would read the King James Bible, but she was listening to it. And then the doors of the street are shut, and the sound of the grinding is low. And I was trying to remember what Mr. Stedman said about the doors of the street, because sometimes I have to go back and look. Go back here. He said it's a vivid picture of what happens when the teeth fall out. And I couldn't remember what he said about that. And the doors of the face are the lips, and they fall in. And so just keep reading. So it says the doors of the street are shut, and the sound of the grinding mill is low. So you connect those two things. So if you don't have any teeth, the sound of the grinding mill, you still have to eat. I like what Mr. Stedman said. He said you can't eat grape nuts without any teeth. And I thought, yeah, that's true. There's some things, but so you have to have soft food, wouldn't you? And you couldn't get false teeth. And so I don't. When I was a kid, I used to make fun of people as a kid didn't have any teeth. I'd make funny faces. I don't do that anymore because I thought that could be me. You know how kids are. We would do that. That's not nice, but we had a neighbor that she would come out to the fence and talk to my mother, and she wouldn't have her teeth in, and it was humorous, the way she talked. But It's a reality. And then it says that, one will rise at the sound of a bird. And it's like, little things will startle elderly people early in the morning. And so just, slight sounds. And all the daughters of song will sing softly. So what happens? You lose your hearing capacity. And it says, furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and terrors on the road. I think you can understand that. Brother Larry and I were talking last night about his fall. And he's not, I don't know if he'll ever fully recover. He's doing a lot better than we thought he would. But when you fall at that age, that's not good. A lot of times that's just the beginning of the end, isn't it? If somebody elderly falls, that's usually the beginning, and they don't want to fall. Plus, you can't catch yourself. When you're younger, you can kind of, football, fall on the ground, get up and keep going. You don't see 80, 85-year-old people doing that because they know it's very, very dangerous. And he says, furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and the terrors on the road. So it's not just that, but, they're afraid of something that might happen to them. And it used to bother me when I was a younger preacher, Jonathan, that some of the elderly people didn't come back to church on Sunday night. Now I know why. They're not going to drive in the dark. They're afraid. It's a legitimate fear. It's a legitimate fear. And things happen. And he says, and the almond tree blossoms. So how many of y'all have white hair? Or you're getting there? Brenda doesn't? She was born. Well, very, very few people get older without their hair turning gray. I've seen Native Americans, and their hair will be black, and it'll stay black when they get older. I don't know what the genetics are there, but most of the time it happens. And the grasshopper drags himself along. I want to say something. Like I said, I wish I had a little more time. I used to hate getting behind elderly people in line. Why? They're slow. They're slow. And then I thought, well, that could be me. And I hope I live long enough to cause somebody to wait on me. I do. Because I'm going to still be here, and I think I need to respect the fact that that person is doing the best he or she can do. And so but what's happening here when all this happens, you're not focused, you're focusing on all these health issues. But if God is planted in your mind, you still have God to lean on. When you sit down and you can relax and you think about it, you lie down at night, remember God, even though you're having trouble. And he says, and the caperberry is ineffective. He says, for man goes to his eternal home. What's that? That's death. Remember God before you die. Why did he say remember God before you die, Lisa?
Because after you die, you can't change it. So when you die, that's whatever spiritual shape you're in, that's the way it is.
And so, Hebrews 9:27 says, as it is appointed to men to die once, and after this the judgment. Some religions teach second chances. The Bible does not teach second chances anywhere. When you die, that you don't come back. Read Luke 16 and the rich man. His destiny was fixed when he died, wasn't it? It was fixed. So these are the aging factors, and ultimately the mourners will go about the streets because this person has passed away and everybody's sad and it's a funeral procession. But then I want to spend a couple of minutes, even though we're close to running out of time, there are things that also can happen regardless of one's age. These verse 6 is regardless of age. Now, for the most part, it's it kind of, young people are excluded, but he says, before the silver cord is broken, that's your spinal cord. How many of you know who Don Blackwell is? I don't know how old Don is, but let's just say he's 55. I'm not sure how old he is. So 3 or 4 years ago, he was in a terrible accident on a four-wheeler, and his spine was broken in two. It has crippled him. And so the spinal cord breaking does not necessarily mean death, but it can. Okay? So a terrible accident can happen to anybody. Age is not a factor. The second thing is the golden bowl is crushed. That's the skull. You know, you can get hit in the head or receive some kind of trauma to the head and be brain damaged. Just like that. And all of a sudden you're what they used to call a vegetable. You're alive, but you're brain dead. And so what kind of decision can you make? None. Of course, either one of these can mean instant death, and then in the pitcher by the well is shattered and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. That's a heart attack. A heart attack could be fatal. I've always read these to mean death. But, a heart attack's not always death, but typically what I'm looking at here, these are things that can bring about death. And I'll tell you why I believe that it's talking about death. Because he says the silver cord is broken, that's your spinal cord. The golden bowl is crushed, that's your scalp, your skull that protects your brain. The pitcher by the well is shattered and the wheel at the cistern is crushed, so your heart fails. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was. That's why I say it means death here. Okay? And the spirit will return to God who gave it. Now, I want to say one more thing. I know we're past our time, but I want you to notice a couple things in these texts. First thing, he tells the young people, enjoy your youth, but you need to remember, the latter part of verse 9, God's going to bring you into judgment for your decisions. Young people make decisions that can alter the path of their life for the rest of their lives, and they will not live for God. True or false? True. They can. And then here, you get over here to these older people, you have to go through all this aging process, and then you could have instant death due to various factors. And so when Solomon gets down to the end of this, in verse 13, he says, the conclusion, when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act of judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So really, when you think about it, and I'm going to stop after this, when you think about it, people's biggest problems are not the fact that they may get sick or hurt or age. The biggest problem is not physical. The biggest problem is spiritual. A person can live to be 99 years old with very few health problems and still die and not be ready to meet God. A person can live all their lives with all kinds of health issues, but they have God in their minds, in their lives, and when they die, they're ready to meet God. A person can live a healthy life and know God all their lives. But the point is, everybody's going to face God in judgment. Yes, ma'am.
I saw on Facebook yesterday where a 101-year-old woman was being baptized.
A 101-year-old woman being baptized.
Yes.
Well, isn't that wonderful? So a 101-year-old baby, right?
Yeah.
Because she was just born again. All right, well, thank you for sharing that.